Hello, welcome to Mike's Mets Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Pashota, and happy Saturday to you. So, we got some news this week. First, let's talk about the Mets' recent success, which was notably, except for the loss last night to the Cincinnati Reds, they took 3 out of 4 from the Arizona Diamondbacks, which was notable because the Diamondbacks are in the hunt for the wild card spot. They're trying to take that final wild card position. Then to lose 3 out of 4 to the New York Mets, a team that has long since put their playoff aspirations aside. Pretty embarrassing for the Diamondbacks. I don't really know what exactly happened to them in this series, but we saw the Mets just completely dominate them for stretches, and pitchers pitching really well, hitters coming through in big situations, a lot of home runs from the Mets, and important to see. It was a good series. I was glad to see it. Of course, the loss to the Reds last night kind of negates it. Great recent success. The most notable piece of news was this week the Mets signing or in agreements to bring in David Stearns, the Major League executive, currently the head of baseball operations for the Milwaukee Brewers. They are going to be bringing him in to serve as the president of baseball operations for the New York Mets now, which would effectively put him in the highest position, second to only Steve Cohen in the Mets organization in terms of power. He leapfrogs Billy Eppler, and it felt like the right thing to do. Stearns was widely regarded as the best baseball executive around, really on par with. A lot of people made the comparison to he is basically the younger Theo Epstein. People see him as a true visionary, a guy who really knows how to formulate and create an organizational vision. He did that with Milwaukee. He developed a lot of great pitchers. He found and definitely worked on locating these incredibly talented players who were very undervalued or were not properly valued. And the great job he did in Milwaukee really seemed to sort of set a point forward with that organization. They have somewhat regressed in the last couple of years, and I think that's because Stearns was really after 2021 starting to look at, okay, where else can I actually move on to? And Stearns from New York originally, with Cohen's money, the financial resources that the Mets organization now has, there was a lot of expectations that eventually there was going to be some kind of combination of these two coming together. No one really knew when exactly because Stearns was still under contract with Milwaukee, but they are letting him out. He is going to come to the Mets, and the hope is that he is going to help change this organization's direction, which has been in a weird state of transition the last couple of years. Let's say from 2022 to 2023, because in 2022, or rather actually after 2021, let's say that after the 2021 season, dismal failure. The Mets bring in a new general manager, and they had a tumultuous couple years with their general managers previous to that, and they had trouble finding a general manager. Which, looking back, I was always like, what exactly happened here? Why couldn't they somehow find a general manager to come to New York, where you have, an owner who was basically giving you a blank check to do whatever you need to sort of fix this organization, do whatever you want to do here, and I'll give you the money and the financial support to do it. And they seemingly couldn't find a GM general manager. They were on their 17th job search, and there's hitting the Indeed job search request looking for people, and it was tough. And they eventually land on Billy Eppler, and I've made my thoughts on Billy Eppler pretty clear over the last few episodes and pretty much from the start of this pod, which is, I don't think Billy Eppler is a very good general manager. I think he is particularly inept. There's some things to be said about the fact that he has had some bad luck. Losing Edwin Diaz at the beginning of this year is a terrible, horrible thing that it's impossible to calculate that you're not going to have your all-star closer available. He is just one man, and when you look at the totality of every baseball decision that he's made since he's become the Mets general manager, it's pretty ugly. He didn't have a great track record coming into this. He had a mixed record under all of his teams when he was the general manager of the Los Angeles Angels. They all finished under 500 or around 500, and he had, much like he does now in New York, considerable financial resources. He had the best player in baseball, Mike Trout. He had aging Albert Pujols, and he would just kind of construct his roster around them. Now, I know a lot of money was spent on both those players, but he seemingly could not figure out how to sort of bridge the gap between his offense, which was always like pretty solid, but could never make it work with his pitching staff. And this kind of carried over into New York, where he has a lot of players who are just, you're like, these aren't major league caliber pitchers. Why are they out here starting every fifth day? What's going on? Why are we continuing to stick with Tyler Begill? What's going on? And it's tough to say what exactly is going to be the point of departure with Eppler. Bringing in Stearns definitely feels like you've made his job obsolete. So Eppler is still going to serve as general manager. Stearns isn't going to override him in any way. He's basically to serve there to check Epler's homework and say, my direction is this, and you're going to do this for me, and you're going to acquire this player, and you're going to be the ones dealing with the players, not me. And this effectively means that Eppler can't make these decisions himself anymore. Stearns is going to be the one who is going to view this organization and make the calculated decisions as to how to improve it. I discussed Epler's checkered history, and I wanted to go over that and say what exactly went wrong. Epler's greatest move for his entire career, and one that he will always lean on, is the fact that he was able to sign Shohei Ohtani. And if you look back in like the records back to like when they signed Ohtani, Eppler was like shocked that like he actually was able to do it. Like he was like, oh my god, we actually signed Shohei Ohtani. It's incredible. It's the one lasting legacy. It's the one move he did that like worked out perfectly. Like he did it, and it was an amazing move. They acquired an MVP, a guy who's likely going to win another MVP this year, even though he's going to probably end his season early due to injury. It's pretty insane, like to think about it. Like he acquired this 2-time MVP, and one of the best moves he's ever made. Now his other moves when he was the Angels general manager, pretty bad. They were a mixed bag. Sometimes he had like a random success. Mostly for the most part though, he was acquiring players that just didn't really work out, and this was like generally almost every time, like he would acquire somebody and didn't work out. Same thing went with the Mets. I was looking through like the war of every Mets acquisition since he's become the Mets general manager, so you get to go back to November 2021, and everything that he's done since then, and players he brought in. Some of the moves worked, some of them didn't. Some of them were short-term moves, others were long-term moves. For the most part, though, he was acquiring guys, veterans, who were going to be guys who were going to be helpful for the team on a 1 or 2 year basis. And it's a dangerous way to structure your organization like that, because if these guys who are veteran players who you're bringing in on short-term deals, there is not always a guarantee that it's going to work out favorably for you. And it's sort of the same way it does with long-term deals. If you're acquiring a younger player for a long-term deal, you don't actually know if your investment's going to pay off as well. The thing is that you have a lot more time for it to sort of work out for you. When you're signing these guys to 1 or 2 year deals, then you have a much more limited window, and all of a sudden you're like, well, why are we spending so much money on this guy? It's only going to be here for a couple of years, and it's giving us mediocre to bad results. And I wanted to go over some of those acquisitions. So these are my top 5 worst and best Mets acquisitions. So top 5 best acquisition that the Mets have made. And I wanted to give DJ Stewart some love here, number 5. DJ Stewart was acquired by the Mets on a minor league deal. I talked about Stewart before on this pod. He is a guy who they brought in essentially just to be, a roster fill. They didn't really know what was going to happen with him. DJ Stewart miraculously kind of changes his career at AAA. We're still hoping this is a clean sort of situation. But he's a journeyman player who they bring in and comes in, sort of changes his swing. All of a sudden, he's swinging with a lot more power. He's hitting balls with a lot more power. And he comes up to the Mets. The Mets bring him in. And he's currently on a run where he's the Mets cleanup man behind Pete Alonso, and it's like it's bizarre. I mean, where he became the Mets' most dangerous hitter down the stretch here, and was hitting home runs at a incredible rate. He has a slugging percentage of like 600 now, and you're looking at it, you're like, what exactly happened with DJ Stewart? So in terms of acquisitions that panned out well under the Eppler era, that definitely has to stand out, particularly for how little he was valued. Again, they signed him on a minor league deal. They're not paying him a lot of money here, but he's giving them incredible results. A 955 OPS for the year, 11 home runs, 26 RBIs, doing that all in just 46 games played. I mean, absolutely amazing. A great turnaround. Now, a guy who the Mets fans are expecting to be a big piece of the team in 2024. Okay, so moving on, number 5, worst. So it breaks my heart to say this, and Verlander is number 5. Justin Verlander, and that's brought in on a humongous deal. And this was supposed to be the guy who was going to help the team. He was going to form a partnership with his old teammate Max Scherzer. The two of them were going to, these aces were going to lead this team to the World Series. He brought in these 2 Cy Young Award winners, multiple Cy Youngs between the 2 of them. You're set. You're good. This is the highest pedigree of a pitching staff ever. You're set. He gets hurt almost immediately, and then when he comes back, the results are middling. For the most part, he turns it on in his last 4 starts with the Mets, where all of a sudden he starts to look like the pitcher, and that the Mets acquired, and it's looking a little bit more like vintage Verlander, striking out guys, putting guys away, long performances. He's doing a good job, but the Mets trade him, and this is the situation where he was brought in to do a job, and he just didn't do it. One, by getting hurt early on in the year, which is not his fault. But then coming back from the injury, he was giving them really middling results. I mean, middling to bad. There was a large portion of the season where his ERA was above 4, and it was one of those situations where you're like, okay, so they acquired this guy on, again, short-term deal. He wasn't going to be here for very long, and you're expecting quality results. He's the reigning Cy Young winner. You need him to pitch like a Cy Young winner. And he was pitching more or less like a number 3 starter for the entire year for the Mets. Again, he turned it on late, but since he's since been traded to the Houston Astros, it's a little bit, you've seen him sort of fluctuate back and forth between good start, bad start, good start, bad start. He's really showing he's not really the Verlander of old, and chalk it up to his arm injury at the beginning of the year. But I would really say that it was a really horrendous acquisition for the Mets, just in terms of the amount of money they spent, how quickly they had to abort their plan, the so-so results that they got when he was pitching for them. What redeems it a little bit is that they were able to trade him back to the Houston Astros and acquire a top prospect, and the expectations that top prospects will be with the Mets pretty soon. But it's tough to say what exactly was going to happen with Verlander here, and it's it was an ugly acquisition, one that was fraught with risk, and that risk just did not pay off like a lot of Epler's major acquisitions. Number 4 best, Chris Bassett, and Epler traded for Bassett from the Oakland Athletics before the start of the 2022 season. And remember, we were still mired in the strike at that point, and they acquired him right before the work stoppage. And what we got was Chris Bassett acquired. People were like, "Oh, okay, that was a surprisingly deft move under the Epler regime, because this was acquiring a pretty impressive pitcher. I mean, like a guy who'd had a lot of, near success to pretty solid success, and it was a guy who was going to be filling the rotation, and Bassett did that extremely well. I really can't say enough about how well Chris Bassett pitched in a Met uniform in that one season. I really wish they had gone the route of bringing him back for another year. Ultimately, they let him go free agency. I think a mistake putting your kind of hopes again on other pitchers. They brought on Jose Quintana to sort of replace him, and Quintana's pitched really well for them this year since he's been healthy. But I would have liked to have Bassett and Quintana preferably over some of the Mets starters that we've had this year. And again, this was a trade that I didn't really see coming. I think a lot of people were like, "Oh, that was a really good move. I like that." And they traded something, relatively easy for it. They traded, minor league pitcher JT Ginn, who has not really panned out particularly well for the Athletics. So I can look at it as, okay, that was a decent acquisition for what was basically a one-year rental. But I feel good about it. It was a really good move for the Mets. He pitched really well for them for the entire season. And if they had been able to have a more solid stretch solid run down the stretch for them in the postseason, he could have been pretty valuable, I think. And per chance, they might have actually decided to bring him back. Ultimately, a lot of money to bring back this older pitcher, but I really liked him when he was on the team. Number 4 worst, we have Eduardo Escobar, and this was something that Mets fans almost immediately, everyone was like, this is not going to work out with this guy. So he starts off 2022, and again, let's say this. There is like a theme with Epler's acquisitions, is that he will see results and he will go after the guy who gave the most recent results. And largely in these cases, whenever he acquires these players that don't pan out, like they will be guys who he had that good year of last year. And then it's like one good year in a year of like somewhat mediocrity. So Eduardo Escobar was an all-star in 2021. It was kind of out of nowhere. Eduardo Escobar's had like middling success. He's gone like very up and down, roller coaster of a career. And veteran player, guy who is well liked by teammates, and I think is a good clubhouse guy, if nothing else. And a switch hitter. Can't ever really go wrong with a switch hitter. And it seemed like a solid move. And when he first came to the Mets in 2022, in April, I was like, that guy's good. I like him. He was getting on base. He was walking at like an absurd rate that was like well above his career norms. And I loved his defense. I've always said this about Eduardo Escobar. I loved the way that he would throw the ball from third to first base. It was a strike every time. He was never like high or low. He was always like a dead center throw from third base. I always loved watching him do that, and it was really lovely to see, especially if you've watched David Wright your entire career. David Wright was always like throwing it every which way. Escobar's like very accurate arm at third base was always really pleasant to see. Problem was he couldn't hit. They brought him in to hit. He could not hit for his life when he came here. He had one good month in what was essentially like a 16-month rental. So they brought him in. And he has this great stretch in September where he's looking like Pete Alonso. He was hitting home runs. Amazing guy. That was it. You can sum up his entire success as a Met in that 1 year. And it was just a really painful thing to watch because you're like, this is a good guy. I like him a lot. He was a well-liked but he could not make contact for his life, and everything he did just seemed to like fail to work out. And it wasn't like he was walking a lot either. After that first month in April, he kind of like went back to how he normally did and was swinging away and not really walking so much after that. So it was tough to watch Eduardo Escobar because I really wanted that to work out. I really wanted him to step up and be a great player for the Mets, but never really happened for him. It was a shame to see. Number 3 best, Adam Ottavino. And Adam Ottavino has had to play a few roles during his time as since he was acquired. They brought in Ottavino around the same time that they traded for Chris Bassett, and it was another thing where I was talking to my brother after they made those two moves, and I was like, those are like great moves. Like I was like, Adam Ottavino, good reliever. I like him a lot. Like, and very much. What really set these like moves apart was both those guys. Chris Bassett was like, solid. He hadn't had like an all-star season like the year prior. He had been, he'd had a good year, and he'd had a good year before that, and he'd had like an average year before that. And it was, you're like, okay, that guy's a pretty solid starter. It wasn't like he had gone like 17-5 the year prior with a 2.5 ERA, and it was like the one good year in a career of where he normally had like 6 ERAs, and that's like an Eppler acquisition to a T. Both those moves were really good. I don't know if he was coming off a bad year with the Boston Red Sox, and there wasn't really a ton of like confidence that he was still an effective reliever at that point. He'd obviously had a lot of success with the Colorado Rockies and some success with the New York Yankees, but you come off a really bad 2020 and 2021 where he was really mediocre at best, and then came to the Mets in 2022 on a 1-year deal and makes it work. And Ottavino to Diaz in 2022 was incredible. Those two were just lights out all year round. From like the 8th and 9th inning, the Mets were basically unstoppable. Ottavino finished that year with a 2.06 ERA. This year, a little bit harder to kind of replicate the success. Again, like I said, he's fit a lot of different roles. He's seen his strikeout rate dip way down, and he saw the walk rate kind of go back up to his normal career rate. 2022 was a real, like, oh, wow, like, this is how good he can be, like, when he's at the top of his game. And it was a real comeback season for Ottavino. This has been more of like a typical Ottavino season. Not to say that he's been bad, but he's been a little bit more of a hittable figure, and particularly walkable. He's definitely walked much more guys this year. But what he's provided for them has been a semblance of stability in a relief capacity for the Mets. It's been really important. And has brought this team at least some semblance of normalcy from that closer spot. And I've really appreciated him, particularly when you look at like the other relievers that the Mets have had. And nothing's, for the most part, really worked out for a lot of these guys. And the way they brought him in, I could have gone with other guys like Brooks Raley or someone like that. But based on what he's done over these 2 years, it's probably been more important for Ottavino to be a quality reliever, and he's been that very much for them. One of the very few reliever acquisitions that Eppler made during his Mets regime that actually worked out really well. Number 3 worst, Daniel Vogelbach, and this is just like kind of like Escobar in terms of I really wish this movie had panned out because I really like Vogelbach. I think he's a great guy. The amount of playing time that Daniel Vogelbach has taken up since they brought him in is just like unacceptable. The fact that he cannot seemingly hit the ball really with any kind of like semblance of consistency is really difficult to watch. It makes it even harder, the fact that they traded a guy away who they probably could have been really using this year. So they traded Colin Holderman away for Vogelbach, and this was like a straight-up 1-1 deal where the Mets had a rookie reliever, Colin Holderman, who had a lot of success that year in a Met uniform. They traded him off for Vogelbach, basically to bring in a DH, and it was hard to watch because just because Holderman's been excellent this year for the Pirates. He's been really quality reliever. A lot of people think he's going to be a future closer at some point for, if not the Pirates, then maybe another team. But to watch his success this year with Vogelbach's really barely effective play. I mean, he's just been. It's really difficult to watch him because you're just like, you don't really hit for a lot. You don't hit a lot of home runs. You don't really get on base enough. You can't play defense. What are you really bringing to this team here? And he hasn't really brought anything to this team in his Met career. I mean, he has a 0.9 WAR over a season and a half, and this is just like, what are you doing for this team? Why is he still here? Why is he on this team? It is a classic Eppler acquisition to bring this guy in and just leave him on the team and then have nothing for him to do. I mean, he cannot do anything for this team in any kind of positive way. And I'm sure he contributes positively every once in a while. You can't just do it every once in a while. You got to do it on a much more consistent basis if you're going to be on a starting spot on this team. And they left him in for way too long, and they stuck with him for way too long, and it's just been really tough to watch. Again, great guy. It has been a really ugly acquisition. Number 2 worst, we have Michael Givens. So I could have gone a couple different ways with this. I could have gone with Trevor Gott, or I could have gone with Julio Rodriguez. There was all three have one thing in common, which is that they were traded for by Billy Eppler, who saw something in them that no one else saw at all, and all three of these guys worked out really badly. The thing is that in the case of Julio Rodriguez, who was a really bad pitcher, he was the only lefty in that bullpen. Again, really terrible move to only bring in one left-handed reliever for your bullpen in a season where you really need your team to work out well, because this is the one season that they're actually playing well in 2022. Julio Rodriguez, what they traded for Julio Rodriguez did not really hurt them. So they traded Julio Rodriguez for Miguel Castro, another Met reliever, and Castro thankfully did not really work out particularly well with the New York Yankees, who that's brought Julio Rodriguez from. So that was okay, even as bad as Julio Rodriguez was for that entire season. Not the worst thing in the world, and there were times where Rodriguez did step up and was a decent lefty for the Mets, I guess. But I could have gone with Trevor Gott. Trevor Gott, the Mets did not trade that much for, and what they did trade, definitely workable. I won't say that Gott's has been a terrible move, because there's still time for him to kind of potentially pan out, but he has not been good this year for the Mets since they brought him in. And I went with Michael Givens because Michael Givens was having an excellent year with the Chicago Cubs in 2022. He had a great ERA, but there were some troubling signs in terms of his walk rate and his hit rate and home run rate, and no one really knew what exactly was going to go on with Michael Givens when they brought him in. He got hurt pretty early on. When he came back, he was really not at all very effective for the team. What makes it harder for the Michael Givens trade is they brought in this reliever in this one critical capacity, which was to be this 7th or 8th inning guy, because they needed another reliever to bridge the gap to Ottavino and Diaz. So they needed Givens to come in and be the 7th inning guy or the 8th inning guy, and you could kind of waffle between Ottavino and Givens, and then you'd be set. And you'd have those two guys, and that would be good. And then you'd have these two effective relievers. They brought him in for that role, and he could not do that role remotely well at all. He was terrible when they brought him over, and it was one of those things where you're like, of course that was not going to work out for them. Michael Givens is a terrible reliever. He had a 4.79 ERA during his Mets run. What's even harder to justify this is that the trade dealt away to the Chicago Cubs a relief pitcher, Saul Gonzalez, who is like blowing people away right now, currently in Able. He's 23 years old. I don't really know how that's going to all pan out with Saul Gonzalez. It might not pan out at all. But it's been really hard to watch because Michael Givens was terrible, and they traded away a viable relief pitcher prospect for this guy who was an absolute train wreck when he came over, and there were few and far between any kind of successes for him. It was just really difficult to watch, and they brought him in for this one role, and he basically failed to do it. And he didn't single-handedly sink that 2022 Mets team, but he played his part. He could not do anything in terms of any kind of value or any positive ability for that team, and it was just a hard thing to see Mets trade away a guy who for that, bringing this guy in. Difficult to see. Number 2 best, Max Scherzer. And Scherzer, because of his lack of success this season and ultimately having to trade him away, is going to be kind of one of those things where you're like, how is this guy really the best acquisition, the second best acquisition by Billy Eppler during his Mets tenure? The thing is, he was outstanding in 2022. He was terrific. He pitched at a level that people were expecting him to do. He got hurt. He was definitely hurt at different stages of the year, and particularly near the end of the year when they really needed him to be being healthy and pitching well. He really did tank. He really did just absolutely blow it out for the Mets right at the end. So that definitely does hurt his value. That being said, he was an incredible piece of that Mets rotation in 2022. And in 2023, it just didn't really work out very well for him. It was sad to see just because Scherzer was so great in 2022 and it was great for his entire career. But it was hard to fathom how quickly he had declined. And when you had it with the borderline disaster of a season that Verlander was having early on, you're like, what exactly happened here? How did these two guys who are making $86 million combined between two of them cannot seemingly pitch at the level that we were expecting them to do? And it was really difficult to watch. That being said, I mean, a great 2022 season. A year where if he'd stayed healthy, he might have won the Cy Young that year. That's how good he was. He was outstanding. Much more mediocre results in 2023. And if there's nothing else to be said about his tenure here, at least they traded him to the Rangers and acquired an infield prospect, Luisangel Acuna, who is, by all accounts, going to be, everyone expects to be a quality major league player. Everyone is looking at the guy and being like, that guy can play. That guy can do a lot of things really well, and I hope he does them all in a Met uniform. It's great. He was a really good acquisition, and if that's Scherzer's lasting value, is bringing in a guy who can potentially be a real help to this organization, great. That's really something else for her. Number 2 worst. We're up to number 1. I went out of order. I'm sorry. I was doing number 2 best, and I should have done number 2 worst with Givens. So let's do number 1 best then. So let's do. The best one was Kodai Senga by far, and there's really nothing to be said about it. Senga started off the year kind of slow. He is so white-hot good right now that it's like, wow, that guy is... Everybody's looking at Senga. I mean, that guy is outstanding. He's going to be... If he can put this together over the course of a full season, let's say 2024, that guy's exciting. I mean, let's and the hope now is just that he stays healthy. It's just and given his age and the fact that there is the risk of Japanese pitchers coming over and getting hurt. It really is. I mean, you have to look at him and as an absolute undeniable success. I mean, a 4.2 award this year, and he's pitched to step up and be the Mets ace when they traded away these 2 enormous stars. And saying, okay, so Senga, you're going to have to be the ace now because the rest of these guys behind you all suck. So, sorry. You're going to be the ace now. Some guys could have wilted. He stepped up in a huge way. I really am very impressed with Kodai Senga, who even in his, less than brilliant starts, still showing me something. Like he's still sticking it out. He's worked really hard at keeping his walk rate down and making sure that even in situations where he is walking guys, he's not letting it affect his pitch rate too much. And I really was encouraged to see his successes over the second half. And again, if you can put it together over a full season, like that guy is gold. That's a great move to acquire him. Another Japanese guy worked out really well with bringing him in over from Japan, and to see him succeed, similar to Shohei Ohtani. If nothing else, Billy Eppler somehow is able to see Japanese players and get the best out of them. So I'm glad to see he has one kind of real vast value to him. Number one worst. This is really no one should be shocked by this. Darren Ruff, who was such a horrendous acquisition. I cannot really describe how bad Darren Ruff was. They brought him in a midseason trade, and again, this was a year where the Mets really needed to bring in somebody. And you're like they have major problems. They have a problem with the bullpen. They have a problem with DH. They need to figure out the DH thing because they need a guy to sort of set that lineup. And you're like, okay, bring in JD Martinez, bring in whoever. I don't care. Bring in somebody. They settle on Darren Ruff, which was like the weirdest move ever because Ruff, 2021, again, recent results with Billy Eppler. He loves recent results. 2021 with San Francisco Giants, had done really well. 16 home runs, had a 904 OPS, but was not playing as well in 2022. The Mets acquire him anyway. And what they traded off was just unacceptable for the results that they are currently having, that they got for him, which was they traded off like a bevy of players, including J.D. Davis, who was having a lot of trouble in New York, and I'm glad he's doing much better in San Francisco. But J.D. Davis has totally outplayed Darren Ruff in terms of where they were when they were traded for each other. J.D. Davis, by far, has outplayed him. They also traded off 3 prospects for Darren Ruff. How did anybody think that was okay? It was the weirdest thing ever that they were able to so completely flummox Billy Eppler and be like, yeah, we'll give you Darren Ruff and we'll take J.D. Davis and we'll also want 3 prospects for Darren Ruff. So just keep that in mind. That we're also not going to send anybody off with him. It's just Darren Ruff by himself. You're not going to get a reliever on the side or a solid utility player or even a prospect to go along with Darren Ruff. Darren Ruff's the prize acquisition that you got here. Darren Ruff sucked so hard for the Mets. It's difficult to describe how bad he was. He was there for half a season. He played in 28 games. He had 0 home runs and 7 RBIs and a 413 OPS. It's incredible. He could not hit to save his life. And Buck Showalter saw it. And Buck Showalter was like, I'm not putting this guy in the lineup. Why did you acquire him? He's terrible. And he couldn't do anything. And he would come up in situations where they needed him to play. Couldn't do it. He had a -1 WAR in half a season. I don't even know how that's possible. That is so incredibly bad. And you see it from his stats. I mean, he could not hit to save his life. And that was one of the most scary, bad moves I've ever seen. Particularly for a headline mid-season trade acquisition at the All-Star break. And you're like, we need to bring in a guy to step into this DH spot. And we're going to acquire it instead. He dovetailed this with Daniel Vogelbach. And bringing in Darren Ruff and Daniel Vogelbach to be your DHs is the kind of insane thinking in the Billy Eppler era that was it really defined it. It was a defining acquisition for the Mets to bring in Darren Ruff and trade off a bevy of assets for Darren Ruff, a guy who exuded 0 value for them. And was in fact a real detriment to their team in every capacity. He was terrible. It was a terrible move. Billy Eppler, you saw from this list. I mean, he has a type. He has a way of acquiring people. He sees short-term results and he goes after them. That is his legacy as a Mets GM. I think he really hurt this team as an organization. The way that his thinking. It really damaged this team from an organizational level, from the lowest A ball to the top major league level. It's really difficult to say how badly he performed as a general manager. He's still going to be here. I don't know how long. Hopefully, very shortly. If his one lasting legacy is that he's able to somehow negotiate Shohei Ohtani over to the New York Mets, and also bring in the current top Japanese starting pitching prospect, who is killing it, Yoshinobu Yamamoto. If they can bring in those guys, if that's Billy Eppler's one positive contribution to this team, is that he can somehow visualize and acquire these top free agents from Japan. Great, that's great. Once he's done with that, please part ways with Billy Eppler. I'm so glad that David Stearns is now overseeing him and can sort of say, no, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do this. And if David Stearns is able to acquire even one better player than Billy Eppler, I will deem it a unimaginable success. He has been an absolute train wreck as a general manager, and I'm looking at this list, and there's a lot of people I left off this list. But looking at this list, I was like, holy God, he did nothing. There's a decent case to be made that, with the exception of Senga, he made no good trades, no good signings, no good moves as a Met general manager, for his entire tenure. It's really insane how bad he has been as the Mets general manager. Really hope to never see him again after he's done here.
Thank you for listening to the Mike's Mets podcast. Please be sure to follow us on Spotify and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. Finally, please also follow the podcast Twitter, which is Mike's Mets Pod, all one word. Appreciate your time and have a wonderful rest of your day or evening. Let's go, Mets.